Well, if you've been with us on Wednesday nights, we're studying through the book of Nehemiah. We're going to be in chapter 4 tonight, if you want to find your place there. Just kind of a very, very quick summary of what has taken place up to this point. So Nehemiah is alive, and his time is during the period of the exile. He is a cupbearer to the king of Persia. After the edict has gone forward that anybody from the Jews that would like to go home, you can go home. But he doesn't go home. In fact, he's probably was born in Persia and has lived his whole life in Persia, and he has a very good job in Persia. He's part of the king's court. He's a cupbearer to the king, so that's a pretty important position. But some visitors come from Judea to the capital in Persia, and he's just asking them, how are things back home? How are things in Jerusalem? And they say, oh, not good. The city's in shambles, and the wall is torn down. It's in rubble. The temple was also destroyed through the exile. Leading into the exile. And so basically they say it's not good at all. Everything's just in shambles, and the people are discouraged. And he's just broken over this. And he's praying, God, do something. And so out of this, God says, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to send you, and you're going to lead a project to rebuild the wall. And so he goes, he asks permission from the king, and he travels back to Jerusalem. In the process, he manages to get a military escort from the king. He gets letters authorizing him to travel through all the different districts to get to Jerusalem. And he even gets permission to use timber from the king's forest to rebuild this wall of Jerusalem. And we talked about how God was at work through all of this. These, unlikely miracles that God provides to give Nehemiah what he needs. And so he gets there, he makes an inspection of the wall, and sure enough, it's really bad. And so he pitches his plan to the people, to the leaders, to the people of Jerusalem. He says, we can do this, guys. We can build this wall. And we talked about some of the leadership skills that he demonstrated in kind of getting people together. And, you do your part. And that was everything from the people who built, beside the king's garden to the people that built the wall by the dung gate. One of them got to smell roses every day as they were working on the wall, and one of them wasn't smelling roses as he was working on his part of the wall. But they all did their part, some more glamorous parts than others, but they all played their role, and the work came together, and it was doing well. Now, what happens when God goes to work? Do what? So does the devil. You can mark this down. If God goes to work, the devil's going to go to work too. And so when God is using you and God is accomplishing great things through you, you can expect opposition. And so this opposition is going to come in the form of a couple of adversaries, Sanballat and Tobiah. They are both sort of foreigners, if you will, that have been, they have appointed positions by the Persians, and so they have a vested interest to keep Jerusalem beat down and keep the wall from being rebuilt. So we're going to take a look at this. Just drop my pen. I'll get it later. I don't need to write anything down right now. Let's take a look at verse 1 of Nehemiah chapter 4. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. He spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads, and give them a plunder to a land of captivity. Give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity. Do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Okay, so chapter 3 ends on a very high note. Everybody is pitched together. We're all doing our part. We're all part of the team. The wall's coming together. Everything is good at the end of chapter 3, and chapter 4 opens with sort of, cold water being thrown on this project. And it comes in the form, first of all, by Sanballat. He's mad that the wall's being built. Why would he be mad at this? He is an enemy of Israel. He doesn't want, it's not in his vested interest to see it rebuilt. He is afraid. He sees it as a threat. He sees it as a threat because a rebuilt Jerusalem threatens his nation, and at least in his eyes it does. And it also threatens his power and position in the Persian government. He doesn't want a strong rebuilt Jerusalem because that could threaten the stability of his nation and his position, or so he sees. People don't react to truth, they react to their perception of truth. And so while that may not necessarily be true, I think all Nehemiah and the Jews were wanting to do is let's build the wall so we can build the temple so we can worship our God. I really think that's their only motive here. But his perception is this would be a threat. My nation stands to lose in this, and I personally stand to lose in this. So he's protecting his kingdom. What you'll find oftentimes in the opposition, if you're trying to serve the Lord and do his work, and you're finding people that are constantly in opposition to that, what you'll find a lot of times is that they're more concerned with protecting their kingdom than building God's kingdom. And that seems to be what Sanballat is doing here. Verse 2 says that he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria. What's this idea of the army of Samaria? Samaria technically didn't have an army at this time, so what would that be? So it's kind of the residents of Samaria that wouldn't necessarily want to see Jerusalem rebuilt. Now, you got to get into a little bit of the history and politics of Israel. Why would Samaria not want to see Jerusalem rebuilt? They hated them, yeah. So you remember getting back to the days Solomon's son takes the throne, and the kingdom is split. Right after the days of David and Solomon, the kingdom of Israel is split into the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of Judah, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. So there's this rivalry from then on until both kingdoms fall. Now, Samaria falls in 722 BC to Assyria, and Jerusalem, Judea and Jerusalem, its capital, it stands for a while longer. It doesn't fall until 587, 586, depending on how you date that, before Jerusalem falls. And so there's a lot of bitter rivalry, almost like brothers that are used to bloodying each other's nose. I mean, they really didn't like each other. And you see that even coming into the New Testament times and in Jesus' day, in this seeming hatred and racial prejudice between the Jews and the Samaritans. So there was that going on. Also, because of Sanballat's position in the Persian government, he would have had soldiers at his disposal. So he had troops, he had forces. So this was a very real threat. This wasn't just one grumpy old man that decided he was going to try to put down the people building the wall. This was a very real threat that included a threat of military intervention here. This was something that was needed to be taken seriously. Then we get Tobiah, who is another kind of enemy of Israel. Tobiah the Ammonite, who's kind of there. Sanballat and Tobiah, they're kind of in this together to try to, thwart the efforts of the Jews. And notice what he said. He kind of does a little taunt here. Whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. In other words, they don't know what they're doing. This wall is just ridiculous. What they're doing is just ridiculous. So how did he perceive this? Yeah, he didn't really take it seriously. I mean, he's like, this is, even if they do try to build a wall, it's not going to amount to anything because it would seem that the deck was stacked against them. I mean, they didn't really have many, if any, professional builders. I mean, they were just regular tradesmen, goldsmiths, perfumers. Just regular people that really weren't, you didn't have any brick masons in this, really. It was just regular people. And even archaeologists that have uncovered part of Nehemiah's wall have said that, you can tell by the construction of it that it wasn't professional builders that built this. In other words, this was an amateur job. They were just doing the best they could. So he basically says this isn't going to amount to anything. Even if they do build a wall, it won't stand. It won't amount to anything. Do what? Yeah, it was just kind of discouraged. And so far, all of this in the early verses is verbal. And we'll kind of hit on this a little bit later, but that's sort of how Satan works. Just kind of give you a heads up. Like if you're trying to serve the Lord and do what He's called you to do, and God is using you, you can expect a counterattack from Satan. Now it'll usually start out verbally, to discourage you. Let's get you off track. But if that doesn't work, if Satan can't get you that way, he's not opposed to ratcheting up in intensity. Just ask the martyrs. It's dangerous to serve the Lord, but it's well worth the blessing that you get from it. But if you think it's going to be an easy road to follow the call of God, it never is. And so Nehemiah is going to find that out in a very real way here. So in verse 4, how does he respond? He prays. And interesting, how does he pray? Does he pray, Lord, bless my enemies, forgive them, for they know not what they do? No, he's not quite that sweet, is he? Turn their reproach on their own heads, give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity. Do not let their sin be blotted out. I mean, he's upset. He's praying. He's praying what he's feeling here, and we can, Well, that's what I was going to say. We can sit back, in our 21st century ivory towers and with a very sanitized view of it and say, well, how horrible that he would do that. If you're the one that rode, a donkey from Persia all the way to Jerusalem to build a wall, and you've got a bunch of ragtags that don't know anything about building, and you finally coached them into, let's build this building, and finally we're doing what God's telling us to do, and God is blessing, and here comes, somebody threatening, with violence, and somebody else saying, that's just the ridiculous thing I've ever seen. If a fox climbed on that wall, it'd fall down. How are you going to feel? I'm not saying how should you feel. I'm saying how are you going to feel? If you look at it in those perspectives, you can certainly see how he would feel this way. And notice, it seems as though what bothers him the most, notice in the end of verse 5, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. In other words, he saw this not just as an attack on himself and the builders, he saw it an attack on God, because this was God's project. God had called him into to leading this, and now these people are trying to thwart what God is doing. So there was a little bit of righteous indignation, we would say there. What in the New Testament might remind you of that? Yeah, when Jesus goes to the temple and he sees the money changers in the temple, and he gets so angry that he goes out and he makes a whip and he comes out and turns over their table and drives them out. Why is he so mad? Because these people were standing in the way of what God was doing. And it seems as though that's what motivates Nehemiah here. It's not that he took it personally, it's that he saw this as an attack against what God was doing. And he basically says, show them no mercy, God. Now, is that a nice Christian prayer to pray? Probably not. I mean, I don't think that's I don't think that's the model prayer we ought to be following, but you certainly can see his frustration, and you certainly can see why he gets so wound up, because he sees this as an attack to try to stop what God is doing. Questions on that? All right, let's look on then to the next set of verses, because it does ratchet up in intensity here. Verse 6. So we built the wall. Now notice that. All the opposition that comes. But they built the wall. So we built the wall. And the entire wall was joined together up to half its height. So in other words, they got it half done. The people had a mind to work. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were being closed, that they became very angry. Now we don't just have two people, we have like whole groups of people, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites. They're building a coalition against them now. All of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. So now we've got actual threat of violence, not just words, not just verbal, but we've got actual physical threats now. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. And Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing. There is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was, when the Jews who dwelt near them came, that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. Now the threat becomes real, in the sense of a real threat of actual physical violence. What does that result in? It results in demoralizing the workers. So they look around and they begin to see the challenge ahead of them. And they say, look, we can't do this. There's so much rubbish in the way, we can't even build the wall, plus these people are going to come kill us. And so the morale of the builders is starting to wane. The adversaries say, we'll just sneak in on them. We'll come in at night. They won't even know what's hit them until we're there. And then Jews from around come, and they, 10 times, Nehemiah says they came 10 times, and they told us that anywhere you go, they're going to find you and kill you. So it's a very serious situation. Verse 6 indicates the morale of the people was good, and God was blessing the work, and the work continued in spite of the opposition, but it then turns kind of sour from there and gets The morale starts to fail when the threats intensify. So how does the opposition intensify? Do what? They plotted, that's right. Evil has a plan now, and it's working that out. So they conspired to attack Jerusalem and create confusion, verse 8. So what spiritual truth does this teach us? I mean, what are we to learn from this? You pray and post a guard. I like the way you put that, yeah. If Satan doesn't succeed at first, what's he going to do? Try again, right? Yeah. So, the New Testament verse, resist the devil and he will flee from you. That's true, but he probably won't flee from you at the first time you resist. It's probably going to take a multitude of resisting before he finally gives up on you. At first, when you resist, he's going to back up and hit you again, only harder. You can expect, if Satan attacks and you're able to resist that attack and keep on with what God's calling you to do, you can expect the attack to come more severe next time. This is not the happy little joyful message that you were hoping to get from church tonight. But if you know me very well at all, you know I'm not the preacher you're looking for that's going to tell you if you just have enough faith, you never have to have any problems in life, never have to be sick or hurt or be broke or anything. That's certainly not what the New Testament teaches. The New Testament teaches this, and the Old Testament as well, that to follow God is to suffer in this life. And the more you follow the call of God and the closer you get to God, the more that suffering becomes real and intense. Yes. Right. 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 And he was starting to lose that at this point because their morale was failing and they were ready to quit. And so he was in a very dangerous spot, not just for Nehemiah, but for the whole project, because even though Nehemiah was saying, let's keep going, the people were losing morale. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. People begin to talk. Men just want to know, we can't do this. This isn't going to work. And yeah. One of the first lessons that the Lord taught me when he called me into pastoral ministry was that you can only lead people where they're willing to go. No matter how great of a leader you are, if the people aren't willing to follow you, you can't accomplish anything. Nehemiah he was a great leader. He had a great vision. He had a great plan, but he was in danger of the whole project failing because the people were losing that morale to follow. But it's going to get turned around. We'll see. So what did, and I think we kind of answered that, Nehemiah's response. He prayed to God and he set a watch. So we see two things. We see faith and we see action. We see prayer and we see action. And both were necessary. So I think there's a spiritual lesson in that. When you're faced with, an obstacle, I think you have to pray, because if you don't pray, you're relying on your own strength, and that's destined to fail. But also, I think that you have to, there comes a time when you have to get the trowel and the sword and go out and actually build the wall. I think sometimes we run the danger of constantly wasting. Boy, this is going to sound bad. God has called us to a work, and instead of going and doing the work, we just sequester ourselves and say, well, I'm praying about it, I'm praying about it, I'm praying about it. And we spend years praying about it and not actually going out and doing it. Here's the answer to that. Pray and do. Have the faith to pray about it, but have the faith to step out and say, okay, God told us to build this wall. We're going to do it. Now, we're going to pray, but we're going to build that wall. And so there's both of that. If you don't really have both of those, then the project, whatever it is God's called you to do, is destined to fail. At some point, you got to have the faith to actually do more than just pray and actually step out and start doing what God has called you to do. Questions on those verses? Sure. Yeah, Satan really hasn't changed his strategy. It's the same thing. He doesn't need to change his strategy. He's still getting us on the same stuff. Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Lisa and I now, we've kind of rode this road so long now, we'll go, that's a test. And I'll go, yeah, but I don't like tests. I've told God I don't like tests. And he says, you're going to take them anyway. But I can pretty well spot them when they come now. All right, well, let's look on then to verse 13, and we'll finish up the chapter here. Verse 13, therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings. I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your houses. And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, everyone to his work. How about that for how God works? So it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, wore armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction and with the other they held a weapon. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive. We're separated far from one another on the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of the men held the spears from daybreak until the stars appeared. At the same time, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem, that they may be our guard by night and a working party by day. So neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. Okay, so what's Nehemiah's plan going forward? Right, so he basically divides the force in half. He's like, okay, one of you is going to guard while the other's working on the wall, and then we'll switch. And he says, wherever, he said, if there's a weak spot, and so, like the enemy attacks one part of the wall, then the guy with the trumpet, the guy with the shofar, he's going to blow to that, and everybody's going to rush to that area and defend that. So in other words, it's interesting, at first we get this idea of teamwork in the sense that we're all going to pitch in and we're going to build the wall together. Now we get the idea of teamwork in the sense that we're going to fight together. Brothers in arms, friends in the trenches kind of deal. If you need me, I'm going to be there. And if necessary, I'm going to lay down my life for you. And so you see how this working with God. Now, this is a great lesson for the church. working in the Lord's work and suffering for the cause of God, or in the church we would say the cause of Christ, bonds us together in a way that nothing else does. These people, these residents of Jerusalem, by the time this wall was built, they were going to be closer than they ever would have been otherwise, because not only had they built a wall together, they had suffered together, they had fought together, and in some cases they had died together. I think that's the way a church is supposed to function. We're supposed to do the work of God, build this kingdom, accomplish the call that God has placed on us as the body of Christ. And that means we laugh together, we cry together, we serve together, and if necessary, we fight together. And that means something different in a Baptist church than it ought to mean. But I don't mean we fight each other. I mean we fight the enemy together. And if necessary, we lay down our lives for one another. And that's how it's supposed to work. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We're doing the Lord's work right here. And I love that where it says, God, our enemies, I'm in 15, our enemies heard that it was known, the plan was known to us, that God had brought their plot to nothing. And then the people's morale returned. They returned, everyone to his work, and they built the wall. So God's purpose was accomplished in the end. What spiritual evidence do you see that Nehemiah saw this as a real threat? Well, in verse 17, they built with a weapon in one hand, and I wrote my own notes wrong, but like a trowel in one hand and a weapon in the other hand. They spent the night in Jerusalem. Now, they got to be saying, hey, we didn't sign up for this. We said we'd help you build a wall. We didn't say we're going to camp out in Jerusalem all this time. But they did it because that's what needed to be done. And they worked by day and they stood guard at night. So, longer hours than they had signed up for, more dangerous work than they had signed up for. One of our favorite places to go when the boys were little was Six Flags in Arlington, and for a while we even had season passes. But anyway, like our family favorite ride was the Yosemite Sam River Adventure. And you float down this little thing, and the Yosemite Sam is robbing the gold thing, and it was. And you're supposed to be like a Texas Ranger, and you're supposed to bring back the bandit Yosemite Sam. But going into the ride, there's this sign. It said, "Wanted, Texas Rangers, long hours, low pay, danger everywhere. Apply within." I told Lisa, I said, that sounds like a call to the ministry. But you do the Lord's work, and there's a certain amount of struggles and obstacles that come with that. Nehemiah finds that out in a very real way here. They didn't even take time to change clothes except to wash, verse 23. So it was all hands on deck for as long as it takes until we get the project finished, was the idea. Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about with Nehemiah here? Make a good movie, wouldn't it? Yeah. They could have got John Wayne to play Nehemiah, right? So. Yeah. Hey, Pilgrim, get away from that wall. Yeah, I don't know. You got me. All right. So what do we learn about faith and courage in these verses? Courage, real courage. And I think we talked about this a little bit maybe a couple weeks ago. The world has a mixed up idea of what courage is. People think courage is not being afraid. That's not true. That has nothing to do with courage. Courage is doing the right thing regardless of how you feel. Doing the right thing in spite of the opposition. Was the threat real? It absolutely was real. Was Nehemiah afraid? I'm sure he was. Were the people on the wall afraid? I'm sure they were. But they built a wall anyway because it was the right thing to do because it was what God called them to do. If you think that God's going to call you to do something and you're never going to be afraid to do that, whatever that is, then that's ridiculous. You will be afraid a lot of times. But real courage is the ability or the determination to do it anyway because this is what God has called me to do. And what enables us to do that? Faith. So faith and courage is tied together. And as we said before, faith is also accompanied by action. In other words, they didn't just sit down and say, well, if God wants this wall built, he can build it himself. I'm just going to sit here. They prayed, they trusted God, and then they got a shovel and a sword, and they built a wall. And I think there's a lot that could be said for that. Questions on those? Yes, sir. You're talking about the Wailing Wall, which was one of the walls of the temple. So the wall that people pray at is the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, and it was the wall of the temple complex, which technically wasn't what Nehemiah built. He built the wall around the city that enabled them to be able to build the wall and build the temple and keep it safe. So, same idea, but yeah. Technically not, but same idea. Same basic principle, not technically the same wall. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. 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 You can see throughout history how God works on behalf of his people and in answer to prayer. It's difficult to talk about history as it's happening, but, and I don't know how you feel about all of this, and I'm not making any attempt to try to get into world politics at this point, but it's difficult for me to look at how the Ukrainian people have defended themselves, in my opinion, miraculously against, what arguably is the second most powerful army in the world, and they're holding their own, not just holding their own, but actually driving the invader back. Now, how did that happen? I don't know, but I know that there are a lot of Christian churches in the Ukraine. Because when the old Soviet Union fell, one of the first places that missionaries went was the Ukraine. And they responded to the gospel in miraculous ways. And so you have all these churches and all these Christians in the Ukraine. And man, it's just hard not to see God's hand in that a little bit. So, yeah. It's well, in our old association in Southeast Texas where we were, every year they would send a mission team to the Ukraine and train pastors for these churches that were forming. All right, we're about out of time. Let me look at the application questions. What theological truths do we learn from this story? You can expect opposition when God's at work. The opposition will often intensify rather than subside. But, and here's the encouraging part, God's plan will ultimately succeed. And like Nehemiah says in verse 20, our God will fight for us. I think that's encouraging. Based on this chapter, what's the biblical way to handle opposition? Pray, keep on working, and prepare for continued attack. Because Satan ain't just going to leave you alone, not forever. I mean, yeah, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. But that's talking more in terms of temptation, really, than opposition. And he's not going to flee forever. He will flee for till an opportune time, and he'll be back. But here's the thing that Nehemiah had that you need to hang on to, this clear sense of call. That this is what God has called me to. It will keep you going when that's all you've got. When God called, when I surrendered to the ministry, I had some college friends that were also in the ministry, and I was telling them about, I surrendered to the ministry. I said, I just really feel like it's what God has called me to do, and the dude looked me straight in the eye and said, you hang on to that, because there will be days that call is all you've got. And man, that was Memorial Day Sunday of 92. So, wow, we're coming up. Wow, I just celebrated. Last Sunday was my 30th anniversary in the ministry. How about that? I didn't even think about that, but it is. But there have been days, and Lisa can testify to that, man, that's about, we had each other, and we had a call, and that's about all we had. But God is faithful, and so that's, yeah. Right, absolutely. Sure, absolutely. All right. I've got a little 2-minute video for you that's a continuation of our little video we've been watching. So.
The building of the wall surprises and angers the neighboring rulers. But they are not concerned. The entire effort seems to them pathetic and hopeless. What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they revive the stones out of the rubbish heaps even though they are burnt? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was with him, said, even whatever they do build, if a fox goes up, it will break down their stone wall. But the ruler's complacency turns to panic after a few days, when they discover that half the wall is already standing solid. Shocked by the pace of the work, Sanballat and his friends hatch a plan to send armed men to infiltrate the builders and attack them while they're working. The situation is extremely dangerous. Nehemiah again appeals to the inhabitants, this time to protect their homes and their city. Do not fear them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Entire families are mobilized, men, women, and anyone who can bear arms. I arranged the people by family with their swords, their spears, and their bows. Nehemiah himself takes the lead of the fighting force. The shofar blower was next to me. Whenever you hear the sound of the shofar, gather there to us. Amidst all the tumult, the work on the wall continues. The builders function simultaneously as construction workers and soldiers. With one hand, he does the work, and with the other, he holds his weapon. The intimidation and threats are of no use. The wall quickly nears completion despite the opposition of the enemies of Judah.
Right. It will be continued next time. So tune in. Tune in. Same Nehemiah time, same Nehemiah channel next time. All right. I appreciate you being here tonight. I hope the Lord has blessed you. Look forward to seeing you Sunday morning. So let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word and the chance to study it tonight. Thank you for the story of Nehemiah and the faith and the courage that he demonstrated, and how you proved yourself faithful in the building of this wall, and you prove yourself faithful in our lives today. God, bless us as we go from here. Make us the salt and light that you've called us to be. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.